How you going, everybody? I am very apologetic for being late, but the past 3, 4, 5 hours have been uh, seismic, cataclysmic. Not sure. I was actually recording a couple of interviews, other podcasts, doing what I do love most, which is trying to provide some degree of analysis and commentary. I mean, in the noise, there are plenty of others who do this, and I don't often do live streams on my own. I may well do so if you want me to. Do let me know in the comments below, and your perspectives on obviously what's happened, and that's what we're going to talk about. Again, I know I'm later than was scheduled, but I also needed time to digest. I'm not a psychologist nor a body language expert, but I had to look at the footage several times and sort of engage some other people in conversation to sort of get a sense of perspectives. I do a lot of stuff on X, and for those of you who don't follow me on X, if you're on YouTube, I do participate in spaces, and I like them because they're a live, real-time conversation where you can engage with different people from parts of the world. You don't necessarily need a fancy setup and equipment, not that this is, to be honest with you can see my lovely rudimentary sort of living room here. But anyway, yeah, and I was just busy trying to sort of, bring more conversation about the deal and what had happened this week diplomatically. And, I had let's get into it. So firstly, my initial expectations were that there was going to be tension. It was not going to be a simple special relationship or Franco-American engagement. This was going to be a delicate diplomatic balancing act. It was going to be fraught with contention. Now, one of the earliest things I think we should address or debate on, and I do want, as I said, your perspectives, is whether or not this was planned. A lot of people, and it's not just pro MAGAs or Trump sympathizers or whatever, people are aligned to Trump. It's people on the left as well, or who are pro-Ukraine, who were arguing that this was staged, that there was this intention by Vance and Trump to sort of catch Zelensky off guard, to what's the word, corner him, and demand a return of finances, to succumb to their demands of giving up or whatever, was ever the goals. I don't see it like that. They certainly have an agenda. Every politician has an agenda, and they were going into this meeting with an agenda, which was to, find a more favorable set of circumstances for Zelensky, for America. Sorry. So I've got so many thoughts running through my head. I might be a little bit, yeah. Yeah. So I personally don't see it like that, though. The way that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, responded, if you look at still images or him sitting there, he's like, he wants the couch to swallow him up, or the ground to open and to swallow him up. I also, if you look more at the longer overall, the footage is about, the full interview is about 50 minutes, something like that. And for the most part, and this is another detail that I think is important to keep in note, was there was civility, relative is very important, I think, in this context. There was relative civility between Trump and Zelensky. They were talking about things amicably. Is there agreement? Does Trump like Zelensky or support Ukraine 100%? No, obviously, but I think that the two were having a conversation. The changes occurred when Vance came in. And there's a few points that I think is important about Vance. But as soon as he came in, there was more tension. There was more combativeness to the tone and the general delivery, more hand signals, more sort of shifting in seats and chairs. And, Vance did acknowledge the perspective of Ukraine and where Russia is. But I think there are a couple of things here on Vance's. Vance is young. He's what, 40? He is a hothead, and he's the youngest of the three, and is probably the least experienced in terms of this issue. Trump and Zelensky have had engagements, and Trump obviously has his personal gripes about Zelensky and the relationship to his legal stuff. But I think that when Vance came in, he has his own personal agenda as well as the White House agenda. Zelensky is someone that Vance thinks is a nuisance. He is much more, or has much more antipathy to Zelensky and the situation in Ukraine than I think Trump does. Trump sees it as an opportunity, a business opportunity. Obviously, I'm simplifying it extremely at the moment, but I think Trump sees it more as an opportunity by which, okay, if he can get loads of money from a deal, mineral deal, then he's okay with sort of continuing to support Ukraine in some form. But he wants that, tit for tat thing. Vance doesn't. Vance just hates the whole thing. He wants his hands washed of it, partially because I think it comes into his longer term ambitions, which is to run. Vance needs a brand. He needs to separate and distinguish himself from Trump. He needs to take up the mantle, so to speak. And so, in my opinion, to a certain extent, I think Vance leveraged this opportunity as a way to really establish to his base that he is ready to be a subsequent Trump, that he is ready to take the MAGA movement and mold it into his own vision. And there are plenty of Americans or pro-MAGA types around the world who will have really appreciated the no bullshit nonsense approach that Vance carried. And obviously, once that started coming in, then Zelensky is, well, some people will say he was defensive or arrogant. Others will say that he was, a man who's presiding over a country which has had tens of thousands of people killed by a warmonger. So slightly different odds there. But anyway, point being is that testosterone, these are three men in a highly intensified situation, lighting, media around the world. It's all publicized. It was inevitable this shit show was going to occur. What I didn't expect was the rate by which it would happen in front of the cameras, and sort of the subsequent events of the press conference being cancelled and Zelensky being kicked out and the whole fallout. I didn't expect that in such a case. I expected there to be tension and disagreements, but them to sort of push through. But what it does illustrate that this administration cares very little about optics. They care very little about how it is perceived internationally. And if anything, that they leveraged it as a way to, put Zelensky in his place, to play to their audience, right? Politics is very performative. And Trump, look at what he did with the Apprentice, right? He's a showman as much as anything. But I think real politicians or people who have more of a political experience, like a Rubio, again, that's not saying that he's fantastic. It's just he's a bit more experienced in that regard. Don't. And regardless of what you might have seen on X of Rubio's reply, that this was a, I stand by your, that's bullshit. He's playing damage limitation. He doesn't actually agree with that. Look at the way he was acting in the room. That's rubbish. So yeah, that's a couple of things about Vance. I think that he leveraged this opportunity as much for himself, as much as his hatred for the issue, but also because, it just, things got out of hand and it got heated. And as soon as he started doing that, that emboldened Trump and, the whole thing snowballed. But that leads me more to the sort of the US leadership, right? So, and I will come to your comments. I will look at it, and we'll have a chat, right? Which is this US administration is fundamentally different in terms of everything. Trump may well want a powerful America. He may want an influential America, but he does not care about sort of, how to put it, the potential longer term risks that it may mean. What I mean by that, and again, I'm struggling to put words to come up with the right words because there's so much going in my head, but it's what I've said in some of my videos. If you're new to the channel, do check them out, subscribe. I try to be objective, but equally I have my stances, which in this case is that Trump is he looks at the world through power politics. He looks at the world through the same equality. So he treats from Macron and Keir Starmer with a higher degree of respect because they come from more powerful nations. And he has that historical relationship to Britain and Ireland or whatever his golf course is, etc. Right? When he walked back his comments yesterday about, oh, did I say that over Ukraine and dictator Zelensky, right? I bet you a fair amount of that was just because of the moment. He'd just been given a letter by the king for a second unprecedented, as in it's never happened before for any state leader. And this, I can't believe we've done that. I think we should rescind it immediately. I thought that before today's disaster, but anyway, I think that he was playing good to the crowd in the UK, which was, oh, did I say that? Oh, I didn't mean that. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? And as soon as he's with company and Zelensky, he doesn't give a shit. As I've made in another video, which I'll link in the comments or whatever, he treats Ukraine as expendable. Ukraine is a small power stuck in the middle of a great power or big power, carving up of international relations and politics. And it's this great power political approach that makes Trump so much different to so many other leaders, not just at the moment, but in recent history of the United States. You can have internationalists or people who looked at the world in great power political terms, right? George H.W. Bush certainly looked at the big themes driving the world and stuff. But it's this dismissal of smallest countries and the fact that the people there or whatever, their interest, it's not really important because it doesn't benefit America in the long term in Trump's sort of, it's typical strongman, really. That's why Putin and others have, or Trump has looked to Putin and others as sort of a, somewhat of an inspiration or a sort of someone by which to set standards of. And it shows you the direction the United States is going to go in the next 5 years. Does that mean he's physically going to intervene in sort of smaller countries like Panama or whatever to get what he wants? I don't know if he would go that far, but he certainly doesn't have the multilateralist or compassion that Biden may have had. I didn't necessarily like everything about Biden. I think he made a lot of mistakes. He was quite incompetent. He was too old, but he had compassion. And I think that that's something that's quite sad to see being erased from the American foreign policy. You can talk about the wastage of international aid through US aid. There is a lot of waste. I'll give you another example. In the UK, for example, I made a video 2 days ago about the British use of defense now, but cutting aid at the same time. More than 50% of that aid went to actually housing migrants in the UK, irregular migrants. Now, international aid, foreign aid, should be spent on foreign issues, not domestic issues concerning foreign, challenges or foreign aliens and stuff, right? That is a terrible use of the it was $4.5 billion or so, or pounds, right? More or less. So that is that's incorrect. I disagree with that. And I think that international aid is important, but it needs to be spent correctly and effectively. And spending it on your own domestic sort of infrastructure to house migrants is not the way to go about it. You're better off resolving the issues in the said countries to stop the migration happening in the first place, right? The root causes, not sort of temporary bandage approaches. So the point I'm making with the aid aspect is the aid has a role, but it needs to be well done. So I understood. I'm trying to be sort of empathetic or patient with people who are anti-US aid in the sense that, maybe doing due diligence and greater accountability and transparency of it is needed. But to cut it completely is insane. And it's symbolic of that broader point I was making about the lack of compassion, and sort of this complete misguided belief that somehow that by disengaging, the United States is somehow going to be more, or if just as fine. Nothing happens in a vacuum. And this is the main point I really wanted to say, which was, or the main thought that came to me, which is, you can talk about the implications, the damage done with Zelensky in Ukraine, but as always, my mind thinks about the bigger picture immediately. And this is the irrevocable trust or damage this is doing to trust and belief and respect for the United States as an international power. There's no coming back from what has happened tonight in terms of damage to Western relations. Every single European capital is explicitly coming out in defense and support of Ukraine. Now, you could argue that they're not coming out in criticism of Trump in some ways, so maybe they're still trying to play diplomatic game. But I don't see how the Europeans and this America are functionable or can function together. I don't know if NATO is sort of dead, but transatlanticism, as we know it, what is it? Right? I think Canada should join the EU. I think UK should shut the fuck up about Brexit and join the EU. We need to stick together, man. The EU is I love the EU, right? Not in everything about it, right? It's obviously globalistic and it's got all the bureaucratic bullshit with it. But in principle, what it's about trying to unify and sort of consolidate European values, which I do love very much. And I partook in another space on Twitter just briefly, and it's a hardline, hardcore MAGA pro-Trump. Trump can do no wrong. It's borderline cult of personality thing. And I put to them the point, which is that you are being so short-termist, so short-sighted, are you not? By not understanding the damage this is doing to the biggest asset that America has had and benefited from since 1945, the alliance network. China doesn't have this. We do business with China. We don't trust China, to quote another guest that I had on a week ago, right? It's true. China does not have the same alliance network. They have a couple of defense pacts. They have a strategic partnership here and there. And if you're wondering what the difference is, it's willingness to commit. To have a joint declaration of an alliance, it shows you that you are intertwined, not just in a physical sense, but you have the same values mentally and blah blah blah. Without trying to sound too soapboxy or whatever, but China just doesn't have that same appeal as America has done or Western values have done. The Philippines, right? A country not too far away from China, 83% of Filipinos love the United States. They are actually, other than I think maybe Israel, the country that loves America and what America stands for, its place in the world. So it shows you the appeal that America can have. And I just think it's extremely short-sighted, but also mainly tragic. It's mainly tragic that I think that this is going to see this unravel at this rate. And, I'm not American. There's nothing I can do to stop it, but I am European. And I do want to see Europe do more to take ownership, to protect itself. And because all of this is with one specific point, which is that Vladimir Putin is a threat. I would love to see Russia and America and the West get on well. You've heard me say this before, and I think it's a pretty reasonable thing to see. I'd love there to be that great interoperability or whatever, engagement and stuff, interaction. But with that guy as the head of Russia, good luck with that. Yeah, no. And someone asked me that question, actually, which was, why do you think, though, it's a fair question, which is sort of, do you not think it's a bad idea? I'm paraphrasing, but they said it in more blunt, probably cruder terms, which was, do you not think it's a bad idea to not have at least reasonable relations with Russia so that you can then have Russia on side for when you take on China, which is the bigger systemic threat? And that's a fair point. It is a fair point. I think it's unwise for the West to demonize Russia in some ways. However, Putin is not someone you can trust at face value or at all, because he wants to decimate European democracy. And I like democracy. I like being able to say things that I think are stupid and be able to talk about it now with you on a Friday when I should be in the bar. But anyway, so it's this naivety of nationalistic MAGA Americans, particularly, who seem to think that sort of simply by having more constructive relations with Russia, that it sort of ends there. Putin will continue to undermine and weaken other entities that America ultimately benefits from. And yes, maybe there was a way that we could better engage Russia in the past, which didn't push it towards China. But the point is, we're not there. And I think it's insane to even try to think about an alternative at the moment, which sort of, if you think that with all the damage that has been done, to sort of have a reset If this was 2000 and Putin was just in office, then maybe there could be some degree of that. But it isn't like that. It's 25 years later, and Putin has developed and instilled a real antipathy to the West or to the United States. So any American who seems to think that at this point they can simply reset relations with Putin's regime and just move ahead fine. Can I have some of that? Whatever you're smoking, because that ain't happening. Putin has committed to China at this point. I don't think he would suddenly reverse course and suddenly come over to the West, quote unquote. But I definitely think he would. He definitely is going to, try to play off both sides. And I don't understand the again. Well, it's the short-sightedness. You get the point I'm making, right? So yeah, I'm just very sad to see this unraveling of everything that I've appreciated about the United States happening so quickly. I thought it would occur that, Trump would do damage, and I was hoping, or still would like to hope, that the West can hold out, that the Europeans can sort of weather the storm, and sort of do what they did the first term, which was keep things ticking over. And then when a more reasonable leader, be it Republican or Democrat or whatever, comes into office, we move on and try to restore relations and reapproachment. Yeah, I don't think so. And yeah, it's just the point is it's non-Western implications, isn't it? This isn't just about what it happens for the United States domestically. It's about the optics and the way that it emboldens anti-American or non-American or Western whatever entities that seek to belittle, undermine, topple the US order. Everything that we've taken for granted for in the West is at risk. And America may be so powerful enough that it doesn't have to give a shit. But in international relations, there's, absolute and relative gains or losses, right? An absolute gain being that we all gain when the American economy is doing well, right? Everybody benefits because Americans are there. A relative gain is when, there's a reduction in oil price. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know. My mind's all over the place, to be honest. This is why I don't do live streams unless I have other people to talk to, because I'm not good at not trying to go on stupid digressions. It's an absolute loss what is happening right now, because ultimately America will see an absolute loss. It will absolutely not benefit from this. Not only are they going to see a less supportive bunch of European nations, which will see a reduction in trade, a reduction in intelligence sharing, and a willingness to operate together on, science or culture or tech. It will be exacerbated by the exploitation of anti-American entities. It's not, it's a double whammy. So, yeah, Putin is reeling his hands. And the best part of all of this is he's not had to do anything. Trump and Vance are doing it for him. So, yeah, we've got a lot of you watching. So I'm sure some of you feel triggered or not. I don't know. But as I said, I had to make a stream about this because it's insane. And this was the last thing I actually thought I would mention, which is Zelensky. Zelensky is a character, and you can be fully supportive of Ukraine. And everything is a spectrum, right? As I try to do probably very poorly sometimes on my conversations with guests, is emphasize that, you can sit on an issue over here, but you might not sit on an issue all the way over here all the time, right? So a lot of people on X will call me a globalist because I work for the UN, the World Bank, and so on. Oh, I almost said the Global Bank. They will label me for that, but that's the point. Just because you work for a single entity doesn't mean you represent and align with everything that institution is associated with. People who often do that framing are very simplistic or deliberately have an agenda of trying to frame you out to be very much one way. I'm more nuanced than that. I believe in internationalism. I believe that the United States should be engaged. Do I understand that they have domestic issues that they want to prioritize? Absolutely. I made that point about the British aid aspect, for example. And I think the UK needs to do something about irregular migration. It's out of control. But does that mean we need to internalize and go as far as sort of reform wants to take us? Not sure about that. So mass labeling is a problem, and I mean to do a video on that at some point. But the other issue is sort of that because you support one thing, you're all the way in that same camp, in the sense of that it's more nuanced. So I want Ukraine to be a sovereign, independent, fully functioning, engaged state in the world. But I also recognize the challenges of giving it all its territory back. It is a challenge. And anyone who doesn't admit that is being, well, disingenuous to you. You know, even the most, that's why I respect most people who I have on the show. And if I haven't respected someone, won't either post a video or I'll be more direct with them, and it can get a bit tense. But Zelensky is one of the topics that I have more conflicting opinions about. I think he's been an incredible statesman in terms of maintaining international support. And he's very good at optics. He's very good at PR. There's no denying that the Ukrainians have done an incredible job in mustering Western support and sympathy around the world. But I also think that Zelensky has been a little bit overzealous at times. And I think that this meeting was one case. Again, he is a man representing a country that is literally in a state of the worst war since, World War II. But if you watch the video a couple of times, even I would get a sense of like, okay, he's a bit, either you see him being defensive or he's a little bit bullish, but this is the problem. He's coming to the United States because he wants help. He wants that additional money. He wants that additional support. But unfortunately, it's like when you're in school, right? And you're talking to the teacher and the teacher's saying stuff and you know that the teacher's bullshitting or that something happened and it's not like that, or that's not true representation. You have to suck it up, or your boss is being a dickhead in work, right? The work example is better, right? The boss is being a dickhead. Your supervisor is being a dickhead. And you want to sock him on, or you want to call him out, you want to do all sorts of stuff, but you can't, because if you do, you lose your job because you're junior, right? This is the same thing. Ukraine relies on the United States. So unfortunately, whether you like it or not, Zelensky has to play the game. And for a few people, including some more Ukrainian aligned types, Zelensky might have got a little bit too carried away. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do think that Vance certainly baited him or deliberately was combative, which meant Zelensky maybe sort of came back a little bit as well. But again, if it just been Trump and Zelensky, I think this whole thing wouldn't have occurred like this. I think that you would have seen difficult conversations being had, but the press conference would have gone ahead. And this deal, whatever, you think about it, whether it's genuine or more of a PR stunt, would have been signed. And Zelensky would have continued to ensure support for Ukraine in the coming weeks. Because keep in mind that Ukraine has been receiving continued support. Trump hasn't discontinued the existing commitments that were kept over from the Biden administration. But now what's happened, if we look on X, I saw relatively recently, about an hour ago, the US State Department has discontinued support for Ukraine's energy infrastructure or reconstruction. That's not great for their ability to, deter or manage against, protect against airstrikes and other assaults from the Kremlin. So it's a challenging one. Now, I mean, I don't go as far as to think that Zelensky was disrespecting them. I don't. I think he might have been a little bit curt or a little bit too flamboyant in the way he responded. But again, you've got to consider the bigger context of where he's coming from and what he's dealing with on a day-to-day basis versus Vance and Trump, who are in DC, and it's all quite cushy. I don't think enough personal consideration of each individual's background or immediate background circumstances is being considered by the MAGA side. But why would it be? For most of them, they have no intention of actually caring about that detail. They just see this as a momentous win for them and an illustration of, strength. And, that's right. Well, that was one of the funniest posts I did see on X, which was, well done, Trump. You weren't bullied by Zelensky. You showed strength there. Yeah, Zelensky. Yeah, Trump really needs to show strength against Zelensky. Like, what are they fucking talking? What are they talking about? Show strength. Like, sort of, how insecure are the Trump cultists that they think that sort of they need to show strength to Zelensky? The guy's not exactly I'm not gonna be bullied by Zelensky, right? I'm not the tallest. Oh, I'm about, I don't know. I think I'm average height. I don't know. 5'10" is that average height? I don't know. I'm not particularly insecure about that. Is my point. And I wouldn't feel particularly intimidated or insecure by Zelensky. So for them to have to frame like he's sort of some massive King Kong guy who's coming in and throwing his weight about and trying to put Trump in his place, it's just, that's absurd. So yeah, this is bad, everybody. 31 minutes in, I've said a lot more than I thought I would say in 30 minutes. I thought this would be going on for much longer. So I've hit all the points I wanted to say, I think. Oh, and of course, last point, actually, why you not wearing a suit, from the journalist. Did you ask that of Elon Musk? Are you going to next time? Double standards. Zelensky wears the same stuff everywhere he goes. Elon Musk doesn't wear a suit. And if anything, I think Zelensky looked better than Elon did in terms of actual presentation, because things actually fitted properly. Like Elon Musk's choice of, clothing and a taste for sizes. So anyway, thank you guys for joining. I'm not ending, don't worry. I'm just taking a pause. Wow, I've had a lot of comments. Thank you very much, Miss Ashtree, for the support. And welcome, Tusha. Nice to see you joining. Appreciate you guys. So yeah, I don't know. Let me scroll to the top and let's try and, if you do have questions, then re-put them in the thingy. Yeah, okay. Now's not the time for EU culture wars. I mean, I do think that the EU has some issues, right? I think we should be able to acknowledge the shortcomings or unnecessary troubles of each respective area, right? And I think that the EU has a lot of issues. There needs to be a move away from sort of overemphasis on political correctness at times. I do think that there has been too much emphasis on certain things, and I think it's nice when you can speak your mind. But at the same time, I do think Europe is finally waking up. Whether or not that translates into actually doing something, that's the problem. It's the inaction. It's the inaction from the Europeans, which is my other biggest concern. America is moving more quickly away from any obligations or willingness to be engaged than the Europeans are being able to keep up, right? We're hearing great comments about supporting Ukraine and taking ownership of military needs, defense, energy provision, independence, and stuff, but it's not moving fast enough. I was in Brussels just yesterday for a function, actually, which I'm very excited to share with you guys in the coming days, and I hope to do more of this actually in the coming days. I'm not really one to mention monetary things, but if you guys do want to see me do more stuff in person, which I do want to do, then I would encourage you to check out the membership or the Patreon, because that enables me to hire out spaces, book guests, do that sort of stuff, buy better equipment. So if you want to support me through those means, I would love that. But I'm English, and also I don't really like, do it at your own free will. If you want to support me more, then I really appreciate that. But also, no expectations there. But anyway, the point I'm making is that I was in Brussels doing an in-person event, and it was really interesting. And I was in the Parliament, and I was in the Commission, and I was seeing the buildings, and just, it's pretty cool seeing this collective area that was established to try and foster democratic and universal and collective values, right? And it's very sad to see Trump's America turning away from that. And I do worry about the ability to salvage the relationship longer down the line. If, in a hypothetical scenario, the United States has an even more, well, it could go one of two ways. You either get a more moderate person in, I don't know who, or a Vance type. It could, and if you get a Vance type, then well, let's not even begin. And we how far are we in? 6 weeks? 5 weeks? No, yeah, 5 weeks. Oh my god, we're 5 weeks in, everybody. Yeah. So anyway, it's very sad, and that's why I think the irony I would say about this channel, actually, I'm filibustering at this point because I'm looking through your comments, is that in the past, pro-MAGA types, the anti-establishment types, the ones who would be, would say that they've been ostracized by the mainstream media and an establishment, would be like, and don't forget to support me, not necessarily monetarily, but, follow me. I'm fighting the fight against the disinformation and the propaganda. Well, technically now, I'm one of those, because I do believe in sort of the more mainstream stuff. I don't believe that all media is evil and, it's all owned by the what do they call it? The Jewish lizard globalist people who use chemtrails to control the population, right? I'm not one of those. I think there's a lot of issues, but I still think that modern science, for example, and vaccines are more beneficial than they're not. I do believe in climate change, for example. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I'm one of the creators now who's fighting the battle against disinformation. Support me and help me spread truths in this post-truth world. I should frame myself the way that all these grifters do. And yes, you can say, well, you're running a YouTube channel, so you are one as well. Well, not really, because I actually do work as well. Anyway, so I'm very worried about the direction that the United States is going to go, and whether or not you could sort of see people talk about a civil war, and I'm not entirely sure that would ever be a thing. I think it's more just the inseparable, what's the word? The divergence, the polarization that is seemingly embedded now within the United States. Yes, a lot of Europe is deeply divided, and the rise of, shall we call them populists, is there. Not just populist right, there are populist lefts as well, and but it's nowhere near the level of America. And there's one guy who I've engaged with before, and I tried to sort of just talk to a bit, but he's such an idiot, and it's the blissful ignorance, it's the arrogant ignorance, right? I hate it when you meet someone, not just in international relations or politics or something. I just mean in social, when you're in a social setting, when you meet someone and you're talking to them about different stuff, and they have such strong opinions about shit that they've never even been to, studied about, sort of. And he just said, what did he say? Piss off back to your shithole country, you hack. Talking about the UK, right? I don't think he's ever left the States at that point if he says that, because I wouldn't say that about America. I have my issues with America. I criticize it a lot, but I would never say that about really any country. There are countries that I haven't enjoyed as much when I've traveled, but I would never say that in such a way. And it's that sort of arrogance and aggression and sort of just approach that I feel it's going to be really hard to unravel in how deep it's getting in Trump's America. So yeah, I think it's very sad. I've only been to 14 states in the US, but it gave me enough appreciation to understand just how diverse it is and why you can't make sweeping generalizations about people. Yeah, it's and that was me. Oh, the amount of times I would have had that conversation with other Americans, and they'll be like, "Oh, I hate our Floridians. They're fuck Floridians," and it's like, Yeah, look, I mean, I know that there's a lot of unsavory people, but is it okay to just say shit like that? I mean, in passing, actually, to be fair, I remember visiting the Gulf Keys in 2019 after I graduated from Johns Hopkins, and we were there for a sort of celebratory few days, and we went to a typical Floridian bar, and I got chatting to these younger they were quite nationalist in that way, but they were like, and I was like, well, Floridian people from Florida and are Floridian. Oh, are Floridians, yeah. Have a bit of a reputation. It's like, well, Floridians. I know, it's really funny. But then it turned out that she had lived abroad for a couple of years. And so it illustrated that she had an appreciation for just different places of the world, and she could make a joke about herself. Often the people who are so immediately offended. I find out the irony as well, actually, about people who are supportive of the MAGA movement. They can actually be some of the most sensitive people in the world. And the double standards, obviously, they talk about the disrespect, or let's say, well, it's all about framing, right? If this was Biden and stuff, they would be berating a journalist who is coming in and interrupting Trump or something. But because it's Zelensky, it's great, he did that. If the journalist interrupted Trump, then they would be like, how dare he? This is so disrespectful. But if it was Biden, it's good, he's holding him accountable. What's the difference? Half the time, these people, when they talk about the perfection of Trump and their administration, it's sort of like, well, okay, but that same sort of thing did happen in the Biden administration, but you hated it because it was just Biden. So yeah, actually, this is a good point. VP, nuclear non-proliferation is dead. Should start their nuclear programs. You see, the thing about that is that I'm just going to put it on the screen for everybody. You see, the thing about that, and this is something that I was having a conversation with Dmitry Operovich earlier today. The episode should be out early next week, which was, in my opinion, Europe has the capacity. We have the capacity to support ourselves, to manage our own defense, security, etc. What we lack is effective coordination, because Northern Europe has very different sentiments to Southern Europe, or Eastern Europe has different sentiments to Western Europe. And until there is a more, I think, clear, coordinated understanding of aspirations around it, it's going to be a massive liability, Achilles heel. And I think that the nuclear aspect of this is important, because at the moment, the Europeans are over-dependent on the US. They always have been, as they have been over-dependent on big markets in China, as they have been over-dependent on cheap gas and energy from Russia, right? The Europeans have been overly dependent on other powers than being more self-sufficient. And I think that that's an objective point that that we can all agree on. But America does provide such an important element in the security architecture of Europe. Now, the Europeans can step up and take the kinetic aspect of things, the actual ground offensive, defensive capabilities. But one area that it will take even longer is the logistical side, provision of radar, reconnaissance, intelligence, right? And that, I think, is sort of the Americans have nukes dotted around so much of Europe that the French and the British, they don't have the capacity to replace that. I don't think Trump would necessarily remove all nukes. That's quite an undertaking. But in what capacity can the British and the French really step up as the two nuclear powers of Europe? Germany is obviously there's the economic one as well, and will militarize over time. But all this takes time. And so in the immediate instance, you have two countries that are more powerful in a nuclear sense, but their militaries are quite underfunded. I mean, the British, I think we have 80,000 troops. French, I think is slightly more fleshed out, but not massively. The Poles are the ones who, in more of a conventional military sense, have that capacity, but that's because they're spending almost 5%, and they have the immediate need to. So there's a huge disconnect here, and I think that the proliferation of nuclear weapons across Europe isn't necessarily the answer. I think it's more about finding a way to better leverage. It's also, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. We don't fully know if Trump's going to completely disregard Europe in every way, but yeah, it's certainly an element that I think we have to consider. You know, and I'm not one to pretend to know the best answer about that, the policies. Oh, okay, I'll read out some comments. Drew D, holy shit, you're pushing all the fake news. It's not fake news. It's my experiences of living in Washington for 5 years across both administrations. I'll mind you, actually. I don't think that there is a. Of course, there are different types of MAGAs. It's not a monolith. There are different people of different backgrounds and perspectives. But I do think that there is certainly a unfortunate degree of idealism about Trump. There is a belief that everything he is doing is the best thing ever, and that there will be no negative repercussions, which there will be. But the problem is, it's like climate change. We don't think about things long term enough. We just think, oh, we're saving money, withdrawing from Ukraine. Okay, fine. But when you start seeing more shit happening negatively in America because of that reduction in engagement, maybe you'll begin to put two and two together. I think it's extremely ill-guided, misguided, short-sighted, whatever, you know. I do wish there was a little bit more oomph from the Europeans as well. Your comment here makes me think of that, actually, Jeffrey, which is sort of, yeah, I don't know if that's how you mean it. I don't know if you're still watching, but I agree. I do think that there needs to be more of a sort of willingness to stand fast. So, for example, Macron comes to mind. I also thought about doing a video, but if you look at the way that the two leaders acted, I found Macron much more assertive, much willing to be forthright with Trump. And I'm obviously thinking about the moment where he grabs his arm, or firmly puts his hand on his arm, Trump's arm, and says, you know, no, that's not quite true. That's not quite accurate. Keir didn't do that. Keir, at the beginning of the meeting, when they're standing in the porch or whatever, the front door of the steps of the White House, right? Zelensky, Starmer is there, and he's like, hello, sort of slightly huddled over, looking as feeble as I thought he would. Macron he's very deliberate with his body language and the way that he talks with Trump. Trump's a big dude. And you go up and you shake hands, and he puts his hand on his shoulder, right? He keeps that distance. He makes sure that Trump doesn't pull him closer, because if you pull someone closer, you lurch forward, you're stumbling, you look less presidential, statesman, and it's the power dynamics, right? So yeah, it's interesting, and I really, as I said before, I hope that the British government rescinds that invitation. Depending upon, I think they're going to be feckless and hold out. But I certainly hope that I hope it doesn't come to this, in the sense that Trump does more to reduce support. But if it were, Trump draws back more and more of the support that's still ongoing, then the UK takes a stand. Right. Because more countries need to take a stand against what is happening right now, because it's disastrous. And I think of almost all of this, actually, as well, come to think of it, is what the Chinese must be thinking. Obviously, we always talk about, all the noise that is happening in Europe, in America, near Ukraine, or in whatever, is joyous. Let me hide the comment. How do you do that? Is joyous for the Americans, for the Chinese, because it illustrates that the spotlight isn't on them, and so they can continue to quietly go about what they want to do with Taiwan. And I am thinking about what all this transactionality and implications means for Ukraine, but also Taiwan. And Ukraine has that added element of sort of, what's the word? It's got the baggage. Taiwan doesn't have quite as much. It's not as tainted as much now. But, Trump's going to be like, all right, you have to give us, TSMC, or whatever the acronym of the chips company is, right? You have the semiconductor companies, right? You have to give us that, then we'll support you. It's sort of, we're going to literally sort of get to that, that stage. Interesting, Gary. I appreciate you sharing this. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Again, I'm not trying to insult every supporter or person who voted for Trump. I don't. There were a lot of people who voted for him because they were tired of the status quo. They were tired of the establishment. They wanted change. For many people, Trump is terrifying change, but he's changed nonetheless, and that's what brought him into power in the first place. So I appreciate that. Interesting that you don't think he could have done anything to prevent this. I mean, in my opinion, it could have gone better, but I don't see how it could have gone any worse. I still don't know if it was staged. I just don't think it was because of the body language of people in the room. And I just don't see. I also just don't think Trump has that mental patience or sort of like complexity. I don't think he's stupid, like a complete idiot, but I think he doesn't have the. Well, I just don't think he could be bothered, really, right? He's selective of when he wants to put in the effort on certain things, and I can't imagine him sort of sitting over some whiskey in a dark room somewhere or whatever in the White House one night, and it's like when it's confirmed that Zelensky's coming, and I wish I had a. I'll pretend, okay, he's drinking a beer, right? I'll role play for a minute, and he's drinking a beer, and he's just sort of sitting there, and he's like, you know what we should do? We should tag team Zelensky. We should catch him out, right? You play good cop, I'll play bad cop. I just don't see that. Again, they probably had an agenda, but to the extent by which that they are going to be so like, all right, you say this bit, and then I'll cut in with that. The rate by which it fell out of kilter or whatever, it deteriorated, was too quick and erratic. I just don't think so. So yeah. Anyway, we've got a lot of you tuned in. Do you guys not have Friday nights? I don't understand why so many of you online. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know. Yeah, thank you, Julian. I appreciate that. Zelensky started it. Okay, Drew, write in the comments, everybody. Okay, if you actually, I'm kind of interested. Can you put in the comments, are you pro-Trump or not, or who do you think more had a who was at fault here? Do you think it was Zelensky or Trump, or do you think that Zelensky didn't help it, even if it was Trump that was largely at fault? To be honest with you, I put most of the onus. And I'm just talking about the deterioration in the argument. I'm not talking about all the other factors related to it. I'm just talking about the in-person interaction at that time. I think it was largely triggered by Vance, either deliberately or not. I think it was his combative tone and style, which led to the exacerbation of the situation. White Wolf Woman. Okay, so you didn't join very early, if you're asking me that, unless that's satire, because no, I'm not at all. Unless you're a troll, I don't know, or a bot. I have no idea. I keep seeing people saying I need a comment, a moderator or something on the chat. I don't really know how to do that. If you'd like to be a moderator, send me an email. But anyway, no, I'm not. I'm sympathetic to the people who support Trump, or why they would have voted for Trump. Because, as I said, there's not one singular type of Trump supporter. There are people who are fed up with the status quo, who voted for Trump for change. And then there are people who believe in Trump because they believe in Trump. There's a difference. As for Putin, Putin is a war criminal who should not be anywhere in the position of okay, that was weird. Oh, well, I'm glad that my chat agrees with me. That was very good timing. I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, so yeah, Putin is a war criminal who should not be in any position of power, and I'm so sad that he is. But anyway, so no, I support Ukraine's sovereignty. I support Ukraine being a sovereign state. I have criticisms of the West, and I think that the Russians could have been better engaged, but none of that legitimizes or justifies what happened on February 24th in 2022. And I made this comment very bluntly, which is, the situation between 2014 and 2022, you can go further back, of course, but I'm just going to go with the past 11 years to keep it to a degree of, otherwise I'll be here for another 4 hours, which is that you know, it was Russia or it was Kremlin, it was Putin that decided to shift the goalposts on February 24th after what had been about 8 years of an unpleasant conflict, an unnecessary conflict, but was relatively contained to a small specific region. And it was him who decided to completely change that and everything else around the world in terms of security norms and values that we approach with. So, yeah, I'm pretty confident that I have a fair balance of things. I know where I know what I would prefer to happen and what I think is more realistic, right? We can talk about endpoints of Ukraine. I mean, all of this has been thrown out of the window with today's events, but like my preferred outcome is that Ukraine goes back to what it originally was before 2014. But the realistic aspect of that is different. It's difficult to see how Ukraine can acquire all its territories back without some kind of economic implosion within Russia, an unprecedented, you know, Trump decides, fuck it, let's do it, right? I can't see how the Ukrainians can do it unless the Europeans can come through, because there's a lot of caveats here. There's a lot of details. The Ukrainians are lacking their ability to well, in-house development is getting there. They're improving, but it's not fast enough to offset the rate at which the Russians are doing it. And the Russians have a bigger economy. Their economy is fully at a wartime. They're also not, well, one fifth of their economy has been land or whatever has been occupied and lost. So that's another disadvantage for the Ukrainians. But there's also the time lag effect of, if there were to be support from Europe, it's still going to take time. That's what I was saying about half an hour ago, right? And then, of course, whether or not the United States does have any involvement at all. You know, if Trump is willing to support Ukraine through sort of very baseline levels, that might be different to no support at all if Trump pulls out of NATO, right? This is another point I wanted to make, and we had a good conversation with earlier today, which is that, you know, this idea that Europe needs to fill the backstop of America, right? Trump is considering sort of, well, he suggested the idea that they withdraw all the troops in Eastern Europe. Europe doesn't have that capacity, or like at least at the moment we don't. We need to 180 our policies to be able to do that. And I was reading one article, which I have a video that I'm probably going to release on Sunday about this, which is the 300,000 deficit soldiers. One institution, which I really respect. I'm not going to give it away because I want you to tune in for the video. So if I tell you the name, you're just going to read it, and then you won't come back. Anyway, one thing I was talking about is a deficit of like 300 or something soldiers that the Europeans would need to fill if America does drop out. It's insane. We have half a billion people across this continent, but we don't have the policies for that. That would require just like mobilization, conscription sort of stuff. And with a younger set of generation or people who aren't necessarily that way inclined, right? I can't see that happening. So we you know, there's so many scenarios from sort of zero US engagement to full US engagement, and then all the ones in between, and then that's not even taking into account whether the Europeans are doing something along that, what Ukraine's doing in the meantime. Is Russia still functioning? Is Putin even around? Yeah, it's madness. It's absolutely madness. What's the sort of the situation we're having to manage. What have you done since the fucking 40s in Europe? I mean, Formula One was created in Europe. So that's a pretty fucking massive media empire and industry. Rolls-Royce, Concorde? Yeah, then the French and the British and the Dutch were quite important in Concorde. Oh, and then there's British Petroleum and Shell and VW and IKEA. Yeah, I think we've got quite a lot of things going on in Europe, actually. We're just not as driven by purely work. You might have heard of the statement, Americans live to work, Europeans work to live, right? I think there's a better balance in Europe, and I appreciate that. And I remind you that a lot of Europeans are actually quite happy at the moment. The barometer's done indicate that more Europeans are happy with the European Union overall than they have been for a while. In the European project, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of Europe is perfect, but more that they believe in the European Union existing, right? For a time, there was a lot of antipathy towards Europe and the EU. About, more than 75% of Europeans are supportive of the EU in some capacity. So, yeah, I don't think that. I don't think that that's really something that is of much relevancy, to be honest with you. But yeah, that's largely it. We cross over the hour mark. So, guys, if you have any questions or things you want me to sort of tackle, then now's your chance. Now's your time. And if you enjoyed this this stream, then give it a like, I guess, and I'll do more often of them. That was really bad English. I'll do them more often. As I said, I have been filibustering the last few minutes because I made all my points within 25 minutes, well, even sooner than that. So at this point, I was just sort of picking comments that I saw and jumping around. To this question, I think it depends on what aspect you're talking about. If you're talking about the European Union versus bilateral countries, decoupling as a concept, if you remember, decoupling is this idea that, the United States and China can somehow be unraveled. It's not realistic. You can't completely decouple, as in have no relationship with or engagement with the two largest economies in the world. Europe is slightly different because in each individual state has its own respective relationship with America. But the EU as an aggregate, as an agglomerate, whatever, I can't see that happening either. Significantly de-risking, which is the sort of the term, the concept that the Europeans came out with a year or so later, which is sort of, again, as always, Europe, a slightly less intense version. Yeah, for sure. But we're already seeing that, to be honest, in that when the United States, when the new administration came in and the talk about retaliatory tariffs and, just chucking everything on everyone, regardless of if you're ally, adversary, or whoever, that was responded to by the Europeans with defiance, not capitulation. And I think that that's the important thing. Europe needs to be more defiant and assertive in what it stands for in its foreign policy. And soft power is a genuine form of influence. There's this misnomer that the only way to get things done is through hard power. And sure, you might get things done more fast or it looks better, but it's not necessarily as more effective. That's where international aid is important. I think I didn't realize just how much the British, for example, relative to our size compared to the United States, are active in international development. There are so many initiatives which are sponsored by the British, whether or not you think they're worth it or not. It shows you that the British still try to exert influence, to have a role, to be present, to be in the hearts and minds of the communities of developing countries that benefit from the projects that the UK helps finance. And, you can see this in Africa, former African states. When I lived in Kenya, for example, there were so many British supported initiatives and the Kenyan people really appreciated that. Does it mean that they love everything about the British? Of course not. The way that the British, the separation between the Kenyans and the British was appalling in the 1960s. But the point is that the British have still tried to play a constructive role through some forms of aid. And that is that benefits the UK. It's still obviously got self-interest. They're not just doing it for altruistic purposes, at least the government isn't. So anyway, the point is that all of these countries have their own respective relations. And so it's going to be difficult to see how they can completely unravel from the US. But and also what industries you're talking about. I think if the Europeans really were to pull their finger out and really get on with this, you could begin to see by the end of the decade some proper military autonomy. And I mean that in a kinetic sense. My biggest concerns are the, bigger extension nuclear element, or I don't think that that's still the most necessarily definitive aspect because no one really wants to be the first person to press the button, but more from the logistical front. The Europeans just haven't invested enough in in radar, in the sort of logistics that the United States has. And I'll use Italy as an example because I've gone there for many years, and the southern NATO base in Italy is so comprehensive. Now, a lot of Italians don't like it, and they think it's a breach of sovereignty, and I understand Italians' perspective on that. But if you get rid of that base, or America stops supporting, kitting out that base, whatever, that's a huge blow. And the Italians don't have anywhere that ability to. Well, I question the Italians' ability to function their own. Well, anyway. So I love Italy, but going there for 20 years, the dysfunctionality that can exist in Italy sometimes. So anyway, I think that in terms of an actual kinetic ability, offensive aspect, you'll see that quicker. But I think areas of real neutrality, like tech, you could see some form of continuance. But there is another element in all of this, which is the views of Americans to European censorship, right? Europe is becoming socialist. Sure, Europe is more left-leaning than America, but I don't believe every single country in Europe to be socialist. So there is going to be a problem that, this digital Axe bill or whatever, I forget the name of it, right, in Europe. That's going to be a huge problem for some American brands, and therefore they're not going to want to do business, or they're going to threaten not to do business unless the Europeans change that. So I think you could see a split there. Again, it's difficult to know exactly how that would work, because Twitter, right, let's use Twitter as an example, because Musk is not exactly a fan of the incumbents of Europe. I don't exactly know how that would work, though, because Europe is such an important market for so many businesses. And so what I've got some friends in the finance area, and one person, she was telling me, she works very senior in HSBC, and she was telling me that there is a concentrated effort here to relocate more jobs from America. Again, not in every single way, it's going to be difficult to do that, but you're seeing businesses, HSBC's American branches were relocating more of their positions to continental Europe. I know HSBC is a UK bank, but the point I'm making is that they were trying to reallocate and focus some of their assets and operations more in Europe, because they were worried about the internalization and restrictions that the Trump administration might put on a bank and financial services as big as HSBC, right? They're number 3, 4 bank in the world, right? I think. So they're huge. So I do think you're going to see some huge de-risking in that regard. Again, I think the most important fact is how well European capitals do with Brussels in conjunction, right? So separate nation states managing their relationships, but also in accordance with the Europeans, so it comes across as consistent. There's not confliction, because as we've seen with the energy provisions in the context of Russia and Ukraine, right? Austria, was it last year? Yeah. Just around the time that the second anniversary occurred, the Austrians returned to importing more natural gas than they had done before the full-scale invasion occurred. Now, obviously, that's very different to how the Baltics feel. They've completely cut themselves off from the energy grid of Russia. So this is the problem, because you've got this divergence of nation states which still have that sovereignty, versus the overarching desire of Brussels and MEPs there. It is a challenge, and as long as you've got Putin aligned entities like Orban, or what's the name of the gentleman who is the president of Slovakia, right? People like that, you're going to see a slight inconsistency. But I'm confident enough that probably wouldn't be too much of a impediment to obstacle to the Europeans being able to sort of disconnect or severely be reduced reliance on America and stuff. And this sort of leads me to Mudkip's mum. I love that name. I need to start playing Pokemon again. I used to love Pokemon. Did people play Pokemon? Is that weird? Should I not talk about that? I need to come off as a sort of mature man who only talks about sensible things. I don't know. Anyway. Well, I mean, look, I mean, okay, I've got my personal opinion, and I've got more realistic, like sort of my preference versus the realistic one. I want Europe to UK in Europe. I went to Brussels and I literally shamelessly had to cut across the border control, the passport line, because I was late for a meeting. I would have been late for the meeting. So I had to cut through people. I don't like doing it. I'm English. I was very apologetic or whatever. But I had to. But that was because I was standing in the queue, which was not for Europeans. It was for all passports. So you have people from other countries which have, well, you know, the Europeans want to be, or the Belgian customs officers want to be more vigilant of. Anyway, Brexit, right? Thanks so much, guys. So I want nothing more than the UK to be in Europe. We had such a unique position, the only country with an opt-out, veto opportunities and so on, to make things cushy and how the way we wanted it. I think it's the worst decision this country's made for decades. And we are still and will be reeling from this for even more years to come, let alone with the developments that are happening now. So with that being said, you know, we're not in that situation. So what is more realistic? Keir Starmer has made it very clear that the president, the prime minister, and all parties, I think, other than the Liberal Democrats until quite recently, or was it the Greens, the more left-leaning part of the political spectrum, if you're not familiar with British politics. He's made it very clear he has no intention of trying to sort of restore or reimagine the relationship with Europe. You know, we're gonna make Brexit work or something like that, right? I would love to see him, as he did with the defense policy shift, shift on that as well. I would love him to say, actually, we are in new times. We are even more in new times than we were 9 years ago after Brexit. We need to deepen our relationship with the European Union. Now, there are caveats here in that, you know, joining the EU isn't a security alliance. Yes, you've got greater economic flow again, but that doesn't necessarily resolve the first fundamental aspect of it. You know, Keir might come out and say, well, technically, we need to, we don't need the EU to work deeper together in terms of security and defense and intelligence gathering or sharing. I disagree with that personally. Yeah, I disagree with that. And all from the economic standpoint to the previous question, yeah, for sure. So the UK should absolutely reconsider it. In what capacity? You know, as I said, I prefer to be in the EU as we were, but we're not. So would we fully rejoin? I don't think so. I certainly don't want us to be part of the Eurozone. I don't agree with that. The sovereign debt crisis, the Euro crisis of 2012 was an illustration that countries of fundamentally different economics and societal structures doesn't work very well, right? For one digression quickly, right? But the one thing we learned from that issue 10, 12 years ago was that when you've got a country that's running a export-led economy with a budget surplus, i.e. Germany, versus one that lied about its economic standing, credit rating, whatever it was, Greece, not great. And the policies at the time that the ECB and the other, you know, institutions needed to implement fundamentally went against what some countries needed, right? You needed to impose austerity, decrease the money supply, rise interest rates. I can't remember exactly which way it was around. I'm just saying, right, you know, you needed to do one set of policies. And the ECB wanted to reduce the money supply and basically implement a contractive monetary policy. The problem with that is that you had 30 plus nations or whatever, 25 nations in the Eurozone, which controlled their fiscal policy. So you've got governments raising spending, making tax cuts, which was like diametrically opposite to what was needed from the central bank. See, the two were not working together. And so, you know, that's why they had to protect the German economy at the cost of the Greek economy. So anyway, that's my point. The Europeans need to iron out a lot of issues before we start talking about. That's why I'm always hesitant about bringing Ukraine in really quickly, because they're a huge economy or population. And, you know, we've seen the rough time that we can have when we introduce some of the Balkan states. No nastiness to Balkan states, but right, you know, you bring in Ukraine, it's going to be disruptive for the European project. So we just have to keep that in mind. So I want the UK to be part of the European Union. I don't think in the Eurozone is best, but I think the customs union probably. We would lose some degree of sovereignty. You know, people argue that we lose control over our borders, etc. I think in the times that we're in, you might begin to see some of these expectations by the European Union actually made more sort of lenient. So I definitely think the UK should consider joining the EU again, but I don't think it's likely, to be honest. Even now, I just don't think. I don't think Starmer has that conviction. I don't think he has the balls. And I want to like him, but he really lacks. That's why I respect Macron more, because I think he takes the risks. And I'm not saying I like Macron in everything, but I don't. I'm not impressed by Sir Keir Starmer's statesmanship. What have the Labour Party done in the past 6-7 months since they took power? Not much. And it's great for him to be supportive of Ukraine, but when you're meeting Trump in the White House, you need to command presence. And I don't think he does that. And I'll give you another example on this, and I'll probably begin to wind down in the next 5-10 minutes. So if you want to jump in with a question or challenge me, then go ahead. I didn't know how long I was going to do this, but here we are. So let's keep going for the time being. Which is when Trump first took power in 2016, he obviously did the diplomatic rounds of calling people, and now he's hosting some of them. But what's interesting is the order by which he's chosen to host people. You know, a lot of people might not understand that IR is just a sort of thing. And this is the difference between people who just say that they're a geopolitical commentator because they've started an X account or a YouTube channel versus people who've actually done it. And if that sounds slightly, well, I've done it. And I'm tired of sort of having to justify it. Like being in a room, watching diplomacy happen in front of you, backdoor diplomacy especially, is a unique experience. I'm not going to tell someone who works in healthcare or the oil and drilling sector or something about the intricacies of their industry. So I don't think people should tell people who work in geopolitics or international relations the intricacies of theirs, because they don't understand. And the point I'm making about all this is that when you choose to call certain people, you are showing who you're prioritizing in your relationship. You're prioritizing who you see as most important in your new administration. And in this case, Trump chose to only see Zelensky now. He only saw France and England now. Netanyahu was way sooner, right? Modi was before. Indicative, right? The special relationship, the oldest relationship, France and America. Not important, right? But he still treats them with more respect than Zelensky because they're more important powers. Again, it goes back to my point about great power competition. But anyway, in his first term, one of the first people he spoke to was a chap called Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister of Australia. And this was, I was in Australia about a few months just before, and I was there, and I remember when Malcolm Turnbull ousted Tony Abbott, and Malcolm Turnbull gave a very vivid account of how it works when you deal with Trump. And he said, Trump responds to strength. So again, there's ways to go about it, right? I think Macron has it reasonably right in that he is assertive. He's not going to allow Trump to throw his weight around physically and metaphorically, but he's also still going to try to be a little bit delicate in his demeanor. And Malcolm, they had a phone call, and it was a fiery phone call because I think it was leaked by one of the medias. I can't remember exactly, but sort of you got the transcript. And people, you can Google this if you want, guys. There's a transcript. I think I'll try and look it up if you want. But there was a transcript of their conversation, and it was fascinating because sort of basically Trump was trying to again be transactional and say that we will support you, but we want greater access to stuff. And it was like, well, no, we've got a genuine national security crisis down here in Australia. Trump, we don't really want to sort of compromise our security because you want greater access to our natural minerals. Yeah, so it's from 2017, and I'll just read you some of the how do I share screen? Yeah, and it's just really interesting because, again, I'm not saying that this guy Malcolm Turnbull had it all perfect, but yeah, Turnbull starts off by trying to do the typical thing of being buttery up and sort of say, we have similar backgrounds. It's within your interests to work with us together. And then Trump goes off on sort of, it's a crazy climate. It's brutal. Let me see here. Okay. So it was about resettlement. And Trump obviously talking about the sort of, I think Malcolm Turnbull was looking for greater assurances from the US over sort of stopping some migration flows and Afghanistan, because a lot of migrants are coming from Afghanistan. And Trump was like, well, yes, but we want to talk about your access to minerals. And he was like, well, no, we want to sort of get this situation focused first. Let me see if I can find it here. So, yeah, so Trump was very critical of the deal that had been signed between Obama and the Australians before. And Trump says here, look, I do not know how you got them to sign a deal like this, but that is dumb, right? He makes it very clear that that is a daft thing to do. So he's already sort of criticizing without being very constructive. And Malcolm Turnbull sort of politely pushes back and he says, I think this will make you look like a man who stands by the commitments. It shows that you are committed. Trump interrupts him. That is the point I have been trying to make. How does that help you? Well, I assume, let me explain. So Turnbull tries to explain to him. Trump interrupts him again. And then Turnbull talks about this being a security concern from the Russians in this case. It was a security. We arranged to stick to the deal. That was it. Yeah. I forgot one crucial point, which was that Trump was unwilling to commit to it because he wanted a better deal. And he was trying to backtrack and sort of squeeze Turnbull for more. And Turnbull stood his ground and he made it very clear that he wasn't going to be mucked around. So anyway, I think that the point is that if you don't go in there with strength and an assertion that you're not going to be, treated unfairly, then Trump will respect you. Does that mean that it's going to be any easier? Not necessarily, but Trump knows that he can't pull the wool over your eyes. And I think that that's also where it comes in the relationship with Putin and Trump, in that sort of the call it a weak hope, but the one sort of thing I've been holding out on is that if Trump gets any smell that Putin is trying to pull a fast one on him, he'll be like, screw this, I'm supporting Ukraine. And I think that he was more likely to still support Ukraine with this situation tonight until Zelensky got, I think, a little bit too carried away. But yeah, it's not easy to see how Trump thinks that Putin's just going to agree and what that means. But yeah, it's not easy. And I don't really know. I don't really know what would be the best way forward. And I know some people don't care about Ukraine either. I mean, why should you care about Ukraine or a country across the world? But I think it plays back into the situation and the short-term, short-sighted, very tunnel-visioned way that unfortunately some people are looking at this, and that sort of simply internalizing is not going to still expose you or keep you exposed in your vulnerabilities to the looks of your adversaries, right? And certainly alienating or putting such a wedge in between you and your enemy and your allies is not the way to go about it. So, no, Ollie, the first country was the French, as far as I'm aware. Or maybe it was the first actual ally. I don't know. I'm joking, but I'm pretty sure it was the French, because when they agreed to support the Americans' fight against the British or the English in War of Independence, the French were more than happy to jump on that opportunity to support them against their bloody British adversaries. Yeah, I mean, all right, guys, we'll probably wind down for today. Last chance. Any last questions? I know you should, you should tag me in the comments so that I see your question. It gives me a ping when I see your question, or if you have mine. What a load of backroom deals are made every fucking day. No, they're not. It's not business, mate. Diplomacy is not business. And that's I think one of the biggest. I don't know why that's on the thingy. It needs nothing for Russia to be independent, hacked by China. I get that. Okay, right. That was a misclick by me. Anyway, so yeah, no, diplomacy is not business, Dan. It's much more nuanced than that. The second oldest business or industry in the world is diplomacy. I'll let you know what the first one is, right? Or career. So this is the fundamental thing that Trump seems to think that by simply offering Zelensky something of a materialistic nature, that's sufficient to get him to agree. There is not, and this is the problem, but something that is true. When people are like, we don't give a shit about Ukraine. Russia will care much more about this issue in the long run than the United States will. They will. But even in so saying that, you can then understand why a business-driven approach is not going to appeal to the Russians or the Ukrainians. They look at this land, much like Trump's comments over Gaza. It's the same sort of thing. Simply by saying, leave it, we'll turn it into a residential property, front land, whatever, Disneyland of the Middle East or the Riviera. That's not how you appeal to people, right? Stories and getting trust and building a relationship is not based purely on what you can offer someone in a materialistic sense. It's the ability to appeal to someone's emotions, connections, right? And you're probably like, oh my God, what is this guy talking about? But it's true. What relationships, even in business, what real relationships that are most successful have ever come from purely, I get something, you get something. Always the best deals are based on a gut feeling, a hunch that you can trust that person, that you can work with that person in the future, right? A business deal isn't a singular action. You can leverage that business meeting for future ones. And that's where trust and rapport and personal relations comes in. So for me, I do think that Trump misses something with his business styled approach in foreign policy. And as much as I agree that transactionality is important, I don't necessarily think it's always going to work in every single situation. So I think that's a pretty reasonable argument. Okay, well, you're just trolling. All right, well, I think I gave you a reasonable answer, but yeah. Why do you think it was a setup, John? I literally just did back up everything I said. I literally just said, Dan. I'm just gonna pick on Dan Steely for a minute. Everybody, Dan Steely in the comments below. I'm not asking you to go after him. I'm not one of those toxic people, but like Dan Steely, what is your beef, bro? I do back up things that I say. I think it's quite self-evident that you as a person would not do business with someone that you didn't have a basic degree of trust or good feelings about. That's just normal, right? The reason why, as I said before, people do business with China, but they don't have good relations with China is because they don't trust it, right? They like China because it comes in, it builds roads, it builds infrastructure, it does all this stuff. But I don't see China being very popular, even amongst the countries that it has good business with. So, and this isn't a defense of the United States and of everything that it does. But yeah. I mean, that would work. That could work, I guess, Rachel. And also North London forever. Oh, you're in North London. How is it? I'm in Central London at the moment. That's why you write contract shithead. Yeah, you're not clearly a successful business bro, mate. Yeah, you're a shithead too, mate. Yeah, exactly. I think territorial integrity is one of those things that we have come to appreciate as being a standard of the international system: sovereignty, territorial integrity, statehood, and it's just the lack of support, but almost the shamelessness by which, and this is the last point I'll make, everybody, as we land, which is there are plenty of Americans who just think that it doesn't matter. They were like, I don't care. I like this new approach to foreign policy, which in that case, I mean, what you can't do anything to change it The only time that I think it will come to bite them back is when they realize how much of a negative long-term impact this has. Because America is going to suffer from this. It makes me think of, is it Ray Dalio's book, World Cycles, or the Great Power thingy, the bit where it goes up and then down? I don't like to believe that the United States going like that. But, I mean, economically speaking, I don't see any other country taking back the, reserve currency off the dollar. China doesn't have an open capital account. It just doesn't have that economic sort of approach at the moment. So where does that leave us? Polis, in terms of we don't have any poles, balances of power. It's just, anarchy. Well, not complete anarchy, but you know what I mean. It's going to be what we thought was going to be the case of US-led order, China-led order, and the non-aligned entities. It's not. It's going to be USA, whatever, still powerful, China and its posse of whoever, and Europe. And then everyone, and others who are like, not sure what I want to do. So, it's. I wasn't sure if I would have much to, if the war in Ukraine came to an end, would I have much to talk about on this channel, because we cover it so much. But clearly, we're going to be busy. Yeah, it's insane. You're pro-Ukraine, but I demand elections. Okay, so if Zelensky were to be changed, but what, for someone who's just more capitulating, Drew? Someone who's more capitulating and allows Putin and Trump to do whatever they want with the country? That they don't stand for more defiance of their territorial integrity and independence? It's a tough one, man. It's easy for us to play God and dictate what another country or set of people should do. And I know that's rich coming from a Brit and our history, but yeah, we'll see. But anyway, guys, what I would say, Dan is just Dan is a little bitch. What I would say very simply is this. Today's meeting was an inflection point when historians and political scientists and international relations theorists or whatever look back at the past 50 years or this century. Today's meeting will be one of the singular micro events that has long-standing repercussions, I think, longer down the line. Does it suddenly mean that, the US is going to implode? Ukraine is finished. Russia is now the king of everything? No, of course not. But what I'm saying is that we have seen a fundamental and very public illustration of a United States which does not operate in a way we've seen in any other administration. I don't even remember quite an action like this in Trump's first term. Maybe because he didn't have anything quite like this to deal with in his first term. But it is a singular event which will have a lot of repercussions. And as I've made very clear, for me, unfortunately and sadly, negatively for the US and Western or European interaction support of one another. And by extension, therefore, a reduction in the ability of democracy and Western values, which you might not think are the best things, but I appreciate, Western values of democracy and stuff like that, and being diminished. And we are certainly more in multipolarity, and we're going to see more exploitation of this, more opportunism coming for countries or entities that want to undermine a lot of what we've taken, I think, for granted in the past 80 years, but particularly the past 30 years. And it's also, I think, setting up a movement within the Trump administration in terms of who carries the mantle next, who takes it next with JD Vance. So yeah, we'll have to see. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I hope it was, I don't know, I'm not going to beat around the bush and pretend that I'm trying to be reassuring or that I, sugarcoat things. Maybe I am being too pessimistic, and tomorrow they would have shaken hands and kissed and made up. I mean, Zelensky, I don't know if he's being asked to leave the country, so maybe he'll be invited round for tea tomorrow afternoon by Trump. I somehow doubt it, but maybe we'll see some pullback from this. But all the things I'm seeing, be it in a written statement, be it a, subsequent messaging from even Rubio, who was not exactly comfortable in the time, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to pull back. I think they're going to double down. And I find it very difficult to see sort of, how this situation can be somewhat salvaged. So I think it's my main message, I think, is Europe, we need to step up. We need to wake up. We need to do stuff. And I'll be here doing more to cover that. And if you enjoyed it, then subscribe, everybody. It's been fun. It's been hectic. And yeah, find me on X. If you don't already, follow me on whatever. And we'll be back tomorrow with the live stream with Constantine of Inside Russia, who is a great individual. And I'm very excited to hear his perspective as a Russian on this. And we'll be back on Sunday with Destiny. I don't know if some of you know Destiny, but he's one of the more vocal left-leaning parts of the US. Very critical. So we're going to have, I think, a hella time in those conversations. So join us for them. The one tomorrow is at 4 p.m. UK time. And you can find it on the channel, actually. I'll just share it with you now. And then the one with what's his face, Destiny, is going to be, I think, like 3 p.m. Sunday Eastern time, UK time, sorry, because he's a bit further ahead. And yeah, let me just show you. How do I share this? I'm really bad at this. Oh wait, no, I don't need to do that. How do I do this? Sorry, guys, I'm a bit of an idiot when it comes to my oh no, Dave, Dan Steely's going to use that as an opportunity just to say you're just a bit of an idiot, period. Yeah, so we've got, let me share the screen. Here we go. Come on, you numbnut. Yeah, that one. Yeah, so I've got it here. No, not that one. That one. Am I sharing the screen? Come on, you bellend. Sorry, all the British jokes are coming out now. Yeah, so we've got it here. It's at 2 p.m., but it's actually for 4 p.m. tomorrow. Inside Russia with Constantine on the US-Ukraine. Well, I'll have to change that on the US-Ukraine non-minerals deal. That's already out of date. My live stream is probably already out of date, isn't it? I should just start another live stream and we talk about reactions. Oh, actually, should I do more reaction stuff? I'm not one of those content creators who wants to be lazy and just react to people on the internet, but I think I should have played the videos and reacted to them in real time. And I'm like, oh my god. But yeah. Anyway, guys, cheers. Have a great rest of your day, evening, and we'll be back tomorrow. And well, keep your head up and watch out there. It's going to be a bumpy ride.